Good evening and welcome to episode 2 of Spice Talks, a Dune Universe podcast. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing great. Spice is flowing.
The spice is flowing and we are seeing with our inner eye. So, last week we had to do some homework. What do you think about that?
It was interesting because after the episode I went back and I want to correct myself on, we had said that the sci-fi miniseries of Dune was put out in 2023.
2003, not 2023.
Correction, yeah.
So we had accidentally said 2003. Oh, did we have Spice fans in my family up in arms? They were like, no, the miniseries came out in 2000. Thank you. I was like, ooh, okay, anger the Spice fans.
So we have been corrected on
We
that
have
one.
been corrected. And I've read this series before. You haven't. But I was not the know-all, be-all of the Dune universe that I should have been.
And that's one thing we're not. We are not the all-knowing Bene Gesserits of our time.
Exactly. The Bene Gesserits of our time have not been founded yet, and I do not think I could be their Reverend Mother. But if you do want a podcast that gives you all the insider information to check out, I will say there is a podcast that we've been potentially looking at listening to. It's called Gom Jabbar.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we definitely would give them a listen as well. Yeah, and let's see. If you guys are listening out there, if you guys want to collaborate with us down the road, just give us a holler.
Yeah, we're just two fans trying to read through the books and really piece them apart and understand them because there's so much to understand. Like we said last week, there's political intrigue, there is feuds between royal houses. I mean,
there's espionage, there's traders going on. Trading and traders.
Speaking of traders, didn't you read this week that there is a traitor possibly in this book?
Is there a traitor among us? Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, all right. So, do we want to go a little in depth with one of the things that I was having to research this week?
Absolutely.
All right. So, I had to research the Landsraad. Okay. The Landsraad, they said that it is the most unstable of governments. Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohayim had said that the tripod is the most unstable of elements, and that's what our medieval government rests on. And I'm sitting there going, well, where did it talk about your government? And then it was talking about the Landsraad. And I remembered learning Landsraad means landed gentry in Scandinavian. So that got me thinking. Landed gentry. You have to be rich. You have to own a lot of money.
Money is power. Power is money.
Right. So that got me thinking. You're learning about this unstable tripod, right? You've got the emperor at the top. You've got the Landsraad, which is made up of major and minor noble houses. And that includes two houses that we're going to learn about today, right? House Atreides and House Harkonnen.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So the Landsraad, it says, was founded in 2100 BG, or before Guild. So this says the Landsraad was founded before this guild. The only other guild I could think of that we've learned about so far was the Spacing Guild.
True. Now, once we get farther in, when we're talking about the different time frames, there's BG and there's AG. So just for our listeners out there, BG is before Guild, AG is after Guild.
Oh, thank you for checking in. I did not know after Guild. So I'm assuming that would be after the Guild is founded. Anytime you see the acronym AG, that would mean something is done after the Spacing Guild was founded.
Right.
And BG is before the Spacing Guild was founded.
Right.
All right. So when I was looking into this Landsraad, it sort of reminded me of maybe the Roman or Greek Senate. You know, it provides checks and balances against an emperor, or maybe even the House of Lords.
Well, yeah, that way one party doesn't have absolute power over everyone else.
Right, but what was confusing me was they said that in some of the books that I was reading from Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. Brian Herbert is Frank Herbert's son, and he has done some interesting books as far as the prequel series of Dune goes. So I was looking into some of them. And in one of those books, they're talking that it's a place of voting shares. That the emperor has so many voting shares, and that the great houses have the majority of those voting shares. So how are those shares created? What do you think those shares are created from?
Okay, so if you think about it, comparing them to modern times here, you're looking at the more shares that you have, the more popularity you have when it comes to voting, the more power you have when it comes to voting.
Right. So, you see, I thought shares is in terms of stocks, capitalism.
Well, yeah, that way you can also look at it as that you're using those shares to buy more power. So the more shares that you have, the more power that you can buy. And for all intents and purposes, crush your opponents.
So tell us if we've got that right about the Landsraad, that the Landsraad noble houses have the majority of shares, then the emperor has the next amount of shares, and then underneath them are minor houses or people who are interested in voting outcomes, like the Spacing Guild. They would even have shares, or maybe even the Bene Gesserit has shares of this stock, so to speak, that could gain wealth. They could trade it to another house and say, vote for me, or I'll give you so much of this and you vote this way on this vote. It sort of reminds me a bit of our own politics.
Well, yeah, because that way you're looking at, okay, who do you want to align yourself with versus your opponents? And that's what we're going to get into specifically
Alliances.
Between House Atreides and House Harkonnen. What were the alliances? What were they fighting about? How did that all begin?
All right. So you were wondering, why is House Atreides chosen to take over this planet?
Right. What was the reasoning that all of a sudden, House Harkonnen was ruling over Arrakis, aka Dune, for 60, 70 years.
80 years?
80 years. And then all of a sudden, the Emperor's like, you know what? Nah, I want you guys out. We're bringing in House Atreides to take over. Now, was it that House Harkonnen fell out of favor with the Emperor? Did they screw up royally? Were they not bringing in enough spice? What was the reasoning for it?
Well, you told me that House Harkonnen is a barony, right? And when you are a barony, normally that's like a bought title. I mean, it could be inherited, but most times it's bought with favors, or if you do something well enough, then the king will bestow it on you.
Right, so you can think of it as House Harkonnen would be a house for hire.
A house for hire. That's a good way of putting things. And one thing that you wonder, it says that they've had a feud. Their mortal enemy, House Harkonnen. The Atreides have had a feud with them. Didn't Toofer Watt say that to Paul?
Yeah, that they were
major feud for hundreds of years.
For hundreds of years, almost maybe 1,000 years. But they never go into it. Frank Herbert never goes into it in the books, or even if you look at the original 1984 film, or the miniseries, or even the most recent adaptation, the movies, they never go into what exactly is that. What are they fighting about? What started it all? So that brings me to the question, is this something that goes back generational thing? Were they related somehow? Is it over money? It lends the listener or the reader, so to speak, leaving it up to their imagination.
Right. You said definitely that it was left up to the imagination as to how the feud began. So, one thing you were telling me about was this specific ritual to this feud. It's called Canley, right?
Right.
And that means that they can only use certain things. Like they can send assassins to your house, or they can poison you, but they can't outright call your whole house out and go, we're going to blow you up in a space battle.
Right. They want to do it in the shadows. They're just not going to come outright into the spotlight and say, you know what? I'm House Harkonnen. I'm just going to wipe you off the face of the earth, House Atreides, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Right. There's even something they have called the Great Convention. Now, the Great Convention is sort of like we have an armistice saying you can't use nuclear weapons against each other, but you can all have them.
Yeah, so the houses, specifically the major houses, they do have stockpiles, but there's kind of an unwritten rule and a written rule both together saying, we got it, but we're not going to use it against each other. If you look at it, compared to our modern way of life here, now here in the United States, we've got our own stockpiles, but then let's look at other countries around the world that have their own stockpiles of nuclear weapons, but we have agreed mutual agreements saying we're not going to use them against each other. We might threaten you, but we're not going to do it.
Right. But didn't we learn in the books, what was it, chapter 3, that the Baron and the Emperor are sort of working together on something hush-hush against House Atreides?
Plans within plans within plans.
And that's where we get into the next thing. What exactly are they going to do? Well, in the book, didn't it say that the Emperor would send his special soldiers called Sardaukar?
Right, and the Sarkar, if I remember correctly, they're almost like an assassin's guild, so to speak.
They're the most powerful soldiers that we know of. But it said in David Lynch's film that the Atreides also had a similar army that was using the power of sound. This is the only thing that I found funny about 1984. They used these things called weirding modules.
So it's almost like, if you ever watched it, and I do recommend watching it, I made the mistake of watching it the first time. I went back and gave it another try. But it's almost like you have the air cannons when we were kids that you would pull it back and would shoot like blasts of air. So it's almost like an air cannon.
Sound wave cannon.
Right, exactly.
You know, I still remember the one character, Shai Hulud, and the rock would break apart.
Yes.
You know, I thought that was interesting. And there's something that we talked about last week with the Bene Gesserit, right? They have this thing called the voice.
Yes, so then some of them would use the voice to amplify the sound weapons, for lack of a better term. We're just going to call them sound cannons. So you're using the voice to amplify the sound when you're firing off the sound cannons. So instead of, let's say, you're destroying a rock or a wall, you can destroy an entire temple or an entire city.
Right. So they never really show these atomic weapons that the families have, but they show these things like such as the sound modules, or they show the voice, and they never really say, you know, that they're going to have space battles. It seems that their commerce prevents them from having outright space battles because you need to petition the guild every time you want to go onto a spaceship. Right?
So there's a lot of saber rattling going on. So it's like you're trying to puff out your chest and say, okay, you know what? I'm here. I got my weapons. But at the same time, you've got this other faction over here, this other house saying, you know what, I'm doing the same thing. I'm going to puff out my chest. But if we both go at it, there's not going to be any winners at all. It's just going to be a lose-lose situation here.
And that's where the Spacing Guild comes in. They agree, okay, we'll transport you to this planet, and we'll transport you to this planet, but we're not going to be involved in your vendetta. You're just going to pay us some money, and we're going to do our business with you, and that's that.
Right, they're staying neutral.
Right. So, my next question is, isn't there another branch of specific technology that we need to talk about? Aren't they called mentats?
Yes. So, an easy way to describe what a mentat is, if you're familiar with Star Trek or Star Wars or any other type of sci-fi series out there, a mentat is almost like an android with a supercomputer for a brain.
But in this world, we don't have technology like androids. So are you telling me that humans had to use and evolve their minds to be able to compute all of these numbers? And that the space navigators had to evolve their minds to sort of bend and fold space to be able to go from point A to point B?
And that is where spice comes into play. If you're ingesting spice, if you ingest enough of it, it is going to enhance a lot of what's going on within your psyche. So, for example, the Spicing Guild, the Spacing Guild.
Spicing Guild.
Yeah, the spicy Spacing Guild. They are the ones who can foresee different outcomes. So
So that way they don't crash land into another planet, right?
Exactly.
And they use navigators.
Right. So the navigators, they do everything with their mind. It's similar to the old 1980s movie, The Navigator, where the little boy, he was using his mind to navigate the alien spaceship.
Very interesting. I never thought of it that way. So, with the Spacing Guild, they need a lot of spice.
Most definite. Most definite.
Who do you think supplies them with the most spice?
So there's only one planet that we can think of, and that is dun 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 Dune. So that brings me to another question: is so what makes the planet Arrakis, aka Dune, so dangerous and so powerful to control?
Well, I think Arrakis is the only place you could find this spice. This geriatric melange, they call it. You know?
That's an odd name for spice, geriatric. But if you think about it too, the spice not only allows you to have better mind control, so to speak, it slows the aging process.
Really?
So, right. So you're not necessarily, let's say the average human life is 70 years. In that time frame, if you ingest enough of this spice, then you might have an average lifespan, let's say double that, let's say 140 years.
Really? That is interesting. So, this substance called spice, everybody wants it. Everybody wants to consume it. It literally makes the worlds go round. It makes trade happen. So, it says that their currency is Solari in the books and in the movies, but they never state how their currency is measured. Like we had the gold standard,
right?
Or silver standard.
So you would look at it as, okay, if you take, let's say for example, an ounce of spice would be worth X amount of Solari. Maybe a pound of Solari or 2 pounds of Solari. It varies depending on who you're trading with.
Really? So I think that, and tell me if you would agree with me, House Harkonnen will do anything to get this planet back, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. They just lost their meal ticket.
10 billion Solaris a year, or a month rather.
A month it was, not a year, but yes, a month. And it was just, the rug was pulled right out from underneath them.
Really? So now they've got the Emperor who's saying, I'll help you out with these Sardaukar, right? I'm going to give you these Sardaukar, and you're going to dress them in Harkonnen livery to go after
Again,
Duke.
plans within plans within plans.
I mean, that's an awful early reveal of the enemy, so to speak. Don't you think?
It is, but if you're looking at it from the Harkonnen standpoint, what have they got to lose? Nothing. What's the Emperor got to gain? Everything.
Right. So tell me a little bit about House Atreides. We know that House Atreides ascends from the ancient Earth origins of the House of Atreus, right?
Right. So you can mythologically you can trace House Atreides all the way back to Greco-Roman times, and going all the way forward, fast forwarding all the way to current time in standard.
10,191.
Right, exactly. So you're looking at House Atreides is a very popular house. Now, if you look at it from a political standpoint, Duke Leto is very popular with the people. He's a people person. He doesn't just sit around on his throne, hiding behind walls. He's out there helping his people. Similar to how Princess Diana was. We all know what happened there. So we can almost compare the two together, almost parallel, where, okay, now you've got the Emperor that's teaming up with House Harkonnen. What are they looking to do? Get House Atreides out of the way.
Right.
Why? Because the Emperor is losing, not necessarily power, but he's losing control over the people. They want someone, the people want someone like Duke Leto in power.
So let's just refresh. House Atreides is made up of Duke Leto, right? And he's a cousin to the Emperor?
Yes, and that's where it gets really tricky.
And then we have the Lady Jessica, his bound concubine from the Bene Gesserit.
Oh, we're diving headfirst deep into the spice pool.
And then we've got Paul, their son and heir.
Yep. Yes.
So we know what happens with popular people. They usually make the powerful people jealous. It could be a double-edged sword.
Exactly.
Right? So then we're talking about the people that are involved in House Harkonnen and in House Atreides. And there are two people that are called the Mentats. We've already discussed that they're like supercomputers with scenarios.
Yeah, they almost have, let's say instead of using 10% of their brain, they're using their full 100% capacity of their brain.
Right. So there is this Mentat in House Harkonnen household named Peter de Vries, right?
Yes. Yep.
And he's a twisted Mentat?
He is a bit twisted, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, we watched 1984 and we watched Brad Dourif as Peter de Vries. And what did you think about that?
He nailed the character.
He nailed the character.
He nailed the character.
You know, it reminds me of his quote about the Sappho juice, you know, how it sets his mind in motion. And I kind of wish that they had done that in the Dune 2000 and then in the new movies, how they talked about the Sappho juice, because that's literally what engages a Mentat's thinking processes. Am I right?
It's almost like a Kickstarter for them. Almost like an energy drink just to Give them that little boost.
Yeah, it sets my mind in motion, he
Right.
said. Over and over and over again. Every time he took a sip of the safflower juice, it sets my mind in motion. It's allowing me to do what I need to do in order to be useful to my house.
Right.
So then I'm wondering, if the spice is so addictive that it can kill you, why do you keep taking it?
Money. Power.
It's a symbol of status.
Right, exactly. Even though something can kill you, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be bad for you. If it can kill you, and it's good for your economy, and it's boosting your popularity, are you going to get rid of it because it can potentially kill you? No, you're going to keep going with it. And that is where House Harkonnen does not want to lose the $10 billion monthly industry when it comes to that. That is their bread and butter. That's the way they support their lives. That's the way they support their family. And this is all being taken away from them.
So tell us what they're going to do. They have something other than what the Emperor's having up their sleeves, right? They've got one of the men on the inside of the House of Atreides.
Plans within plans within plans within...
Plans.
Exactly. There's a traitor among us.
Right. Do we want to tell them about the traitor now? Or do we wait till next week?
Let's think about this. Let's go ahead.
All right. So we have a traitor named Dr. Yue, right?
Yes.
And he is a Suk doctor. And what this means is that they've got some sort of special conditioning that they can't hurt a human.
So it's almost like you have an unwritten rule that whichever human you are bound to, so to speak. So let's say he's bound to Duke Leto. So he can't hurt Duke Leto specifically. He might be able to hurt someone else in the Atreides family, the House Atreides family, but not necessarily Duke Leto. And that brings us to another point.
What point is that?
So they might be able to take out the sun.
You think so?
Possibly.
So that's where we're at this week. We're
Yes.
now trying to find out whether they're going to set out a vendetta attack against the boy Paul Atreides.
So if you can't take out the father, who do you try to take out next? The heir.
Right. And that's where we're going to lead with next week?
Yes.
All right.
So
then.
guys, before we end, I want to thank all of our listeners around the world. We went back. This is only our second episode. However, we saw that not only do we have people listening here in the United States of America, we've got people in South America. We've got people in Western Europe right now that are tuning in, listening. So if you guys have any questions that you want to send us, click on the links. You can send us questions. What do you want us to cover next? We are definitely going to be getting deeper in the sandbox here, so to speak, when it comes to House Atreides and House Harkonnen. Stay tuned, guys. Thank you all, and have a great night. May the spice flow in your favor.